me again, I'm afraid. and this is the sort of follow-up video to the last video, which was about the perspective of Advaita Vedanta, this perspective of the world of name and form, and the position that you take when you become the presence that is aware of name or form, name and form, and how you immediately go there. As I said, everything is like a trigger that can automatically catapult you to presence, because you know its name or form, and you ask yourself what or who is the receiver or the perceiver of the perception. So that was the first video. And then I mentioned in the video that I wouldn't talk about the quality of presence, that you should sort of go and find that out for yourself, because as lots of spiritual people say, that you shouldn't believe them, you shouldn't just listen to their experience and say, well, that's the way it is, that's the way it must be then, because so and so said so. But you should go and have that experience yourself and ask yourself then, what is that experience like? So that's your job, kind of thing, to go to this presence and reside in the presence and examine it. So now that we've got past the point of realizing that it's a kind of perspective, and you can catapult yourself directly to presence, the next problem is staying there, because there's an awful lot of name and or form surrounding you. You can blank that out by closing your eyes, or all these things people do to either listen to music or listen to nothing at all in order to try and blank out some of the perceptions so it's easier to focus. Also a thing that I did in the beginning, and now I think in hindsight, maybe not, well, maybe it's okay in the beginning, but eventually it's good to subject yourself to all of those things so that you learn to allow them to be while you're doing the thing that you should be doing, which is retreating. Retreating's a bad word, but drawing back to presence, and all of those things become irrelevant anyway. So, but presence is activity impedes on presence a lot. So you'll find that when you get to this point, or when you find yourself retreating back and you feel like, oh, this feels different, there's something else there, there's still activity going on, and the transition between activity and stillness of presence is not a hard boundary, but a sort of a fuzzy boundary, so that you might find yourself coming to a point where you feel like, oh, I've got it, but then it starts wavering, and then suddenly you're out somewhere else, off in your head to the shops, or whatever thought or whatever thing arises, or a noise or anything else, and so you have to keep going back. And this boundary, this fuzzy boundary, means you keep lingering around a boundary. This is my way of explaining it. You keep lingering around a boundary and not really sensing it's not really definite. It doesn't feel immediately sort of, oh, right, that's it, there. You might get that sensation, but often it's like, oh, it's gone again, oh, it's back, oh, it's gone again, oh, it sort of wavers. Because name and form keep interrupting, keep intruding on it. And it's such a unfamiliar place for most of us that when you find the place, you're not really sure, is this the place? It's like asking somebody on the street, excuse me, is this Presence? Yeah, no, it's just over there, mate. All right, it's like 3 steps further. So you walk over there, and that's not right either, and so you sort of walk around looking for this place. It's always there. It's always been there. But you have this sensation of, am I right on the spot, kind of thing. And then there'll be moments where you are on the spot. And so you have to keep visiting the place to recognize the place. That's why I say then go there and examine it, because it's like going to a holiday home where you don't know your way around the house. And so you keep opening doors and, oh, there's another room. Oh, there's another kitchen here. There's a second bedroom. We didn't know. But once you've been there a few times, you start getting used to that, and you get more and more used to those things, and then you find smaller things, smaller details, and smaller until it becomes, you go in there and you're immediately at home. You know exactly where everything is. You know that cupboard, when you put it open, squeaks, and that cupboard, when you put it open, doesn't open far enough, so you can only open it this, and so on. All the little intricacies, idiosyncrasies of the place become familiar because you spend more time there. And so this fuzziness sort of dissipates, or the clarity of the place, the space itself, becomes more and more obvious the more time you spend there. So that's why you should go there. That's why going there and staying there and examining the place is a good idea, because the longer you stay there, the more familiar it becomes, and the easier it is to find it then, because you know what it feels like. So once you're there, it's a good idea to sit and sort of describe the place to yourself. Go through the what does it feel like, and once you get that sort of point where it's becoming more and more clear, you start trying to go deeper and deeper into that clear place. The boundary goes further and further away, and you become more and more familiar with the depth of this space. And the overwhelming sense that people generally seem to get, the thing they describe as happiness, which is a bad description, or even bliss and peace and so on. They're just descriptions, I think, of the same thing ultimately, which is a place of acceptance. You accept all of the things you've just retreated from. Retreated being a bad word, it's still there, you're still aware of it, but you accept it as it is. And acceptance of the place in which you now find yourself. And that overall acceptance of things means you're free to just be here, right now, where you are. And that freedom, this is mukti, like liberation. I see it as like the freedom. It's suddenly realizing that the bonds that you thought were holding you, attachments, are suddenly gone. Maybe only for moments, maybe only for seconds, but they're gone, and you don't have any of those attachments, and you can just be here. And it doesn't cost you anything. It's liberating. So this is a sort of probably a step towards you. The deeper you dive into that pool, the more the liberation and acceptance of everything as it is grows. So it's a step towards that kind of thing, but you feel it as, like I say, a sort of acceptance. It comes over as like a sort of deep sigh, like a, oh, great, I don't have to do anything. And that's what people then describe as blissful or happiness. It's that condition that they're describing, and then you can dive deeper and deeper and deeper into that condition, because that's surely not the end, just to find that condition. That condition continues on. So describe the qualities of it to yourself. Explore the topography so that you can ask yourself, are there any boundaries to this? If I feel myself around this space, a bit like a blind person in a room, can I feel my way around space? What can I feel? Are there any boundaries? Are there any walls? How far does it go on? Time, what does time feel like here? And so on. And it seems that lots of people come up with the same answers. It seems to be timeless and lacking boundaries. And so you just explore that space, and the longer you spend in that space, the clearer it becomes that that is the space, and the boundary to the world of Namarupa gets further and further away, and it becomes easier and easier to recognize the space when you come over and over again, when you come back. And like I said, really seeing meditation as a practice, something you do, there's somewhere to be and something to do is not correct, because it's always there, and eventually you make a realization, a light goes on, you are enlightened. A light goes on where you realize, hang on a minute, I don't need to do any of this, it's there all the time. So I think it might have been Rupert Spira who said it in a really nice way, that it's always there in the background, and at some point there becomes a point where there's a sort of overlap and you recognize it's there all the time, and then at some point it starts to bleed into the foreground and pervade everything. So you have moments in your day where you're doing something, and maybe only for a millisecond, maybe for longer periods, you have this realization, there it is, it's right here, while I'm doing the dishes, while I'm doing this thing, because it's never been anywhere else. So it starts to move from the background into the foreground and pervade everything, because it actually does pervade everything. Everything else is simply a veiling, covering up this thing, this condition, so that the condition is not recognizable. But the more familiar you become with the condition, the more you see it everywhere, the more you feel it everywhere. So it starts to bleed through. And you recognize those moments as well, because those moments will be a second or a moment of falling back into that presence and realizing it's here. It's always here. There it is right now. So it's maybe useful. I don't want to say this as if like this is the way to do it. It's just my experience. But it sounds similar to lots of the other the experience of lots of the people who've described it in a similar way. It could be useful to recognize a place, go back over and over again so it becomes more and more clear, and to recognize it when it appears in other situations. And that's why it's useful to describe to yourself, your avatar, the quality of the space, so that becomes more and more recognizable. Like, again, walking into a house and saying, right, okay, so there's a bedroom there, there's a bedroom there, if I turn left, there's the bathroom, and so on and so forth. So, but eventually you don't need to do it, of course, at some point. There's no need to describe it anymore. It's obvious and clear where you are and what's happening. And in the moments where it happens during the day, and it will happen if you continue to practice, it will suddenly jump to the foreground and you realise, oh, that's that. Maybe only for a second, and then it might disappear again. And the objective is to push it more and more into the foreground. Doesn't mean that you have to retreat from the rest of life and the world of Namarupa, because that's our world, that's our illusions. That's perfectly okay. You don't have to give that up. You just realise that there's one superimposed on the other, and the superimposed projection becomes more and more just okay, while the other remains all the time. That's the aim. So you can function in the world as this stuff, while you're aware all the time that this is not everything. There's this other condition that radiates through all of that. And the longer you can spend in that space, at home, the easier, stronger, clearer it becomes. I hope that's clear, and I hope that's helpful. I sort of just wanted to dispel some myths about the mysticism, maybe. I mean, like, that's okay, and you can look into all of that, and the question of what consciousness is, and all, that's all okay and debatable. And just as interesting is the neurophysiology of it. It's part of my job, and it's an interest as well, where sometimes I waver between, well, it's just a neurophysiological condition that I'm producing. Yeah, that's true. I'm possibly not. Both of those are perfectly okay and acceptable for me. And so it's maybe not useful to judge and just have, it's one or the other. It could be a combination of those things that get you to another place, however you want to see it. But it seems to be, it's so predictable in its pattern. Since thousands of years, people have done this and come up with predictable patterns and describe it in the same way, that it's beyond the point where you say, well, this is just fluke. Yeah, it's either a condition and a property of our neurophysiology, and or something else that we are not yet aware of. How you choose to see that is your thing, but the pattern is clear and obvious, and so you can repeat the pattern, you can repeat the condition that somebody else has had, because you're a human just like that. You are built in the same way, and your receiver, if you go for the idea that our brains are a kind of television or radio, they don't produce the signal, they produce the program on the screen, they receive the program from somewhere else. And your apparatus, it projects itself onto your apparatus, and your apparatus is the same. So it will work for me in just the same way it worked for a rishi 2,000 years ago or whenever, because the apparatus is doing the same thing, but the apparatus is just a receiver for the signal. And when the apparatus stops working, the signal doesn't stop. So, neurophysiology, spirituality, consciousness, panpsychism, whatever you want to call it. All of that is debatable, but the actual process seems to be the same and reproducible amongst all human beings when coaxed in a similar way. There are lots of paths to this thing, but many of them being the same, but they result in the same thing. That's what I'm trying to get across. So maybe it's useful to just focus on that once you find the space, find clarity in the space, recognize what the space is, where the boundary is to Namarupa, and then start examining that space and going deeper and deeper and deeper into that space. I hope that's useful and helpful.